this is Cold Start.
So last episode with Todd's Dream Garage, we touched upon some interesting vehicles, some very eclectic choices.
Some of that might be Dream Garage, or maybe it's partly Nightmare Garage, depending on how you look at it.
But it brought up this interesting topic of these iconic cars from the past that may not be iconic for being great cars or good cars, but just by the simple fact of them being weird or odd or even failures.
Or even just cars in some case.
So we thought we'd go into a little bit of a list of some of those weird, bizarre cars that for one reason or another stays in our mind and stays as an iconic image of the past.
Yeah, what is it about these cars that makes them stand out, makes them stand the test of time, makes them iconic, makes them weird or just different than everything else? It's kind of different for all of them, so we'll maybe explore the boundaries of that.
So I'd like to jump into a very specific era and maybe a specific company. Chevrolet in the early 2000s, I think, is the epitome of a collection of cars that might not be categorized as good cars, but just weird, bizarre, iconic.
This episode is not sponsored by Chevrolet from the early 2000s.
Chevy in the early 2000s, it was this period of time where their design was really this modern throwback. And they wanted to bring back some of those styling points from, the 50s and the 60s, some from their iconic cars, but bringing them into the 21st century, into the 2000s. We're namely talking about, I think we can start to imagine where we're going with this, but the HHR and the SSR were all a part of this redesign for Chevy to make these modern day classics.
Yeah, I mean, how we got here maybe bears a little bit of discussion too. In the 80s, boxy cars reigned. Everything looked like a box, was squared off, had sharp edges on it. And then in the 90s, people started thinking about the future. 2000s coming, it's going to be the end of the world. There's this Y2K thing, and we don't know if we're going to survive it. Cars started getting rounded and looking a little bit more like space age, I guess you could call it.
Smooth.
So going into the 2000s, we had these smooth cars, but now we had this sense of relief, like we survived. It's past 2000, but we don't really have any ideas because we weren't sure we were going to make it this far. So we started looking backwards for inspiration.
If you look up the SSR, it's a convertible pickup truck. They were convertibles. They had hardtops in them that would retract. And if you want to try to make sense of what an SSR is supposed to be or where it fits into the market, like it is perfectly the epitome of like just excess within the automotive space. There's nothing that you could do with an SSR other than just like feel cool in your SSR. And SSR stands for Super Sport Roadster. But It's a pickup truck.
It's a pickup roadster with a bed that's too short to use as an actual pickup truck. And the front is dropped really low, so it's kind of raked. Mm-hmm. Like it looks like it was made for the movie Cars.
Yes. Yeah, no, it looks very cartoony.
Like Pixar designed this thing. And across the front of the grille, which is really interesting, there's this line that extends out wide that looks like it's an exaggerated bow tie, like the Chevy logo. Mm-hmm. But it actually splits the front headlights. And I can't imagine that was in any way functional.
No, well, all these cars are about style, right? There's nothing functional about an SSR. So I guess where the styling came from, because it has like these really bubbly fenders to it, is it's supposed to look like late 40s, early 50s Chevy pickups, right?
Right.
That older style of like, there's more of a hip to it. There's more of a fender flare to it.
Yeah, with a little beach cruiser kind of thing going on.
This is what I could see in like retired people in Florida in like trailer communities. There's nothing that you can really do with your SSR other than just living your life out, cruising down into the Keys and getting some margaritas. That is the only purpose of the SSR. Now, if we want to talk about practicality, but you still want the same sort of like modern retro design, that's where the HHR comes into play. So the HHR is more of a compact SUV variant, but still staying to this retro styling design.
So HHR means Heritage High Roof. Well, I'd agree with the high roof part. I don't know how much heritage there is on this thing.
But it still follows that same sort of like mentality of trying to give it more hips or more like fender to it. So like they're trying to do throwback to like some of the old wagons, wagon SUVs that they had back in the day. The most interesting variant of the HHR, which they did make a super sport model, which was performance oriented and had a little bit more power to it, but they made an HHR SS cargo van.
So this is like what they called a bread van or like
Delivery van, like a milk van.
Yeah, yeah.
So like they're trying to go back to these old panel vans back in the days of like that used to be like the Chevrolet panel vans where there's no windows. There's windows up front, right? You have the driver's side window, the passenger side window, and the windshield, but then there's no windows in the back of it.
So this looks like a delivery vehicle. If you could imagine a little general store back in the 50s would come bring the bread and groceries to your house. It kind of had that look, but worse.
And it's miniature. It's a compact SUV. It's small. But once again, for these early 2000s cars, it's like, who is buying this? Who wants a cargo van that has the sport package? Like, who needs to be delivering flowers 15 minutes faster?
Yeah,
No one.
well, you have to imagine, okay, so this is a retro play. This is the early 2000s. They're obviously aiming this at boomers, right, who are going to remember their childhood and maybe these trucks or kind of roadster things they saw driving around. But I can't imagine anybody actually would look at this thing and say, that's genuinely a good-looking car. I think what these have is they're distinctive, they're different, but by all accounts, they're kind of strange. It doesn't all add up. It doesn't come together. I can't help but think of, you remember that episode of The Simpsons where Homer Simpson designed a car? Mm-hmm. And it was this byproduct of all these things he imagined, and it just came together to look like a total turd, right? It just didn't work. And that's kind of what I get out of these cars.
They're trying to go after this old school look, but in a modern era, selling to like nostalgia, but just doing it so wrong, just so incorrectly. And I think going off of that, of what you're talking about, of like, oh yeah, like this idea of going backwards and making it modern sounds so cool, but it just isn't. I think the perfect example of that, transitioning, the Plymouth Prowler, I think is the poster child for this design language. I think it's the most radical of the bunch. It had exposed front wheels. I mean, it did have fenders on them for like DOT purposes, but it was basically this old, 30s hot rod design, 1930s hot rod, this wedge shape to it, the exposed front wheels, and the tucked in or the fendered rear wheels. It was basically just a big cheese wedge, is what it looks like.
Yeah, with the drop top on it too. So you had this throwback kind of roadstery looking, what do we even call that, hot rod kind of car? Like,
yeah.
You remember the old ZZ Top videos? You know what I'm talking
Or like
about?
Hot Summer Nights.
Hot Summer Nights car, yeah. Kind of that inspiration for sure. But somehow it didn't come together.
So the most interesting thing for me with the Plymouth Prowler is we're going for this modern retro hot rod, but it's got a V6. That was just such a missed opportunity to like put a V8 in it. And so it was a V6. It didn't sound all that great. So my family has owned one. So I've had the fortune of driving a Plymouth Prowler.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was one of the special editions. I mean, they're all special, but it was one of the special edition two-tones. So it was silver on black. It was the second rarest color combo to the Woodward edition, which was red on black.
So you realize this is coming after the Dodge Viper era. And they were like, what are we going to do next? And they came up with this thing.
And I feel like the market for these cars had to have been retired people in Florida. Like that was probably the main category for the demographic for the Plymouth Prowler. I can tell you by driving one, the designers or whoever produced this car, whoever led the Plymouth Prowler campaign, they never drove the car. It looks phenomenal if like you're into that styling. Like it's radical, right? Like I think we can admit to an extent it's kind of cool.
In intent, yeah. I think in design, yeah. In execution, I'm not so sure.
Fair enough. But you're like, okay, this thing must be like pretty fun to drive because it was aluminum bodywork. It was pretty lightweight for what it was. But the first thing you realize when you get into this thing is that wedge shape really comes into play in the driver's compartment. Where your feet are in the pedal box, the whole left side of the car comes in. So there's really no room for your feet whatsoever. It's all cramped, it's crowded. The other catastrophic thing of this vehicle is none of them came with manuals. They were all automatic, slush box, like the worst 4-speed automatic you could ever imagine. The thing never stopped making noise, and it wasn't good noise because it was a V6. You wanted it to shut up for the most part. Every time you would hit a bump, the thing would move around, and you could watch your front wheels basically vibrate and like move because they're visually exposed.
And this is a rear drive car, right, with the transaxle, so your transmission's out back, and you have this front engine in that narrow compartment in the front. What a weird design.
I was never confident enough in it to like push it by any means. Like you could floor it in a straight line, and for the most part it would stay straight. It would kind of want to wander, but I was never brave enough to ever push it in the corners to really give you a sensation of how it handled. But I don't think anyone knows how a Plymouth Prowler handles in the corners at speed.
Well, I think when they made this car, a couple of tip-offs could have been, they came in these funky colors. There was a purple metallic and like a burnt orange metallic color. At this point, you know, a car company has kind of run out of ideas when they're already into the interesting colors when the thing just first comes out.
I don't think there was a boring color to the car. I think the most boring one you could get was silver. The greatest accessory, I think, in car history is the fact that you could get your Plymouth Prowler with a matching, paint-matched trailer. And the trailer itself looks like the second half of the Plymouth Prowler, but just shrunk.
So like somebody cut off the second half of the car.
Downsized it.
Downsized it, reassembled it, and now you're trailering it.
Yeah, and it had the same wheels that the Plymouth has. And the thing was is that you needed the trailer because there is zero, I'm talking zero room for any sort of luggage or bags or anything like that.
So to make a trailer to give you more room, they also rounded the back of this thing to look like the back of the car, so to guarantee your trailer also had an insufficient amount of room to carry anything.
Well, the rounded slope in the back, that was basically only enough room for the soft top to go into. So like the nature of the trailer is like it's all hollow on the inside, so you actually had room to put in like 2 bags. Now, this vehicle in my family was given to my grandfather, and he actually drove it a bunch. I would say that he probably had one of the more high mileage Prowlers out there. He didn't put that many miles on it, but he actually drove it. And when him and my grandmother would go on road trips, they actually would have to unpack their clothes out of their luggage bags and just lay the clothes into the back of the Prowler.
Amazing.
We weren't lucky enough to have the trailer. We didn't get the trailer.
So the trailer rolled on 15-inch tires, and the car itself was staggered with 17s in the front and 20s out back. It's kind of like a dragster, right? Like I think of a super comp dragster with little tiny bicycle wheels in the front and the big honking 34s in the back.
It was trying to be like the old hot rods of the day of what you used to build to drag race your buddies. That's why I'm saying like this had to have been for retirees in Florida because they're the only ones that actually had something that looked like that back in their heyday when they were in their teens and 20s. So they were just trying to relive, having a hot rod.
The design of this car came from an art school project. And one of the results of this project, according to Wikipedia, was a thesis by none other than Chip Foose, which included drawings of this thing as a retro roadster. So this comes from an interesting pedigree, and what they came up with looks like it had to be designed by committee, right? Like nobody would make a car like this exactly on purpose. It kind of looks like it was designed to be sold at a Mecum auction.
That's very true. 100%. Like this is one of those vehicles that you buy because you think it's going to be special, and then you wait for it to become special. And frankly, I don't think they've ever become special.
I think we're still waiting.
It's a bizarre car. It is very much a unique styling to very much the 2000s era.
Yeah, so I mean, like PT Cruiser is another one of those. If you're not familiar, you're going to be Googling for PT Cruiser. This is a car that was sort of a rolling joke. Everybody who saw this thing said, God, that doesn't work. And my understanding was when they first came out with it, they were trying to attract a younger audience, right? They had seen that for a while, their demographics were skewing older and older, and they were thinking about the future when there weren't going to be a lot of those buyers left. So they have to do something to try to attract a younger buyer. And they completely whiffed. People from that boomer generation saw this car, and it made them think that it was something targeting young people. So they sort of liked it. They leaned in on that. But young people ran the other way. When they saw these things coming, they're like, oh, that looks like a grandma car.
The thing is that like we look back on the PT Cruiser now and just like how absolutely terrible it is. But the thing is they produced them for 9 years. This was from 2001 to 2010. They produced the PT Cruiser. And so the styling that they were trying to go for was like 1930s Chrysler Airflow models. So like super aerodynamic S cars from the 30s. But they sold actually pretty well. That's what's so shocking is like, we can all say like, oh my God, that's such a terrible car. It looks disgusting. Who would ever buy that? There was a lot of them on the roads. It was a successful model for Chrysler.
Yeah, they were kind of cheap, right? So I think there was that. People could afford to buy one.
Right, yeah.
They were altogether bad. I think whatever magazines it was at the time rated them as one of the worst cars that had come out. Yet they were successful in this way that they sold a lot of units.
It was a practical car. And the thing is, like, if I look back on PT Cruisers now, I would say for sure that was a funny looking car. But there's also a piece of me that like kind of wants a PT Cruiser. I wouldn't pay anything more than like $1,500 for one, but I would kind of want to have one just to rip around, especially with that wood paneling. Like, I think it'd just be a funny joke. And I actually have seen a couple PT Cruisers with like eBay turbo kits on them, and they can do some pretty gnarly burnouts.
Oh man. Well, there was also the drop top version of this, right? So the convertible that would eat into your limited towing or your storage capacity. So something like this you would think exists to be a storage type of a car, right? It looks like it would have a big back. Didn't PT stand for personal transport?
The PT Cruiser convertible, like that is the most funny variant of the car. When I was a little kid, you would see PT Cruisers everywhere. Like that's another thing is like, I don't know where they've all gone because like they used to be everywhere. You would see this on every single corner. But whenever we were behind a PT Cruiser convertible, I always called it the bathtub or the hot tub. The way that the line was on the rear of the convertible, it just looked like this big tub. And it just was not a sexy or attractive looking car whatsoever. Like there's no way that you're pulling a mate or a significant other cruising around in a PT Cruiser, especially a convertible.
You know, they did come out with a PT Cruiser GT, which is kind of funny because they bumped it all the way up to 230 horsepower.
What a ripper.
Yeah.
And once again, we're talking about these cars of like, they're iconic, but they're iconic for various reasons. And like that car, it's a joke. It's funny. Like it becomes part of society because it's unique, because it's weird, because it's ugly, because it's fun to make fun of these certain cars. And PT Cruisers were the butt of the joke for the longest time. And yeah, I don't know where they went. Like I've kind of thought about this recently. Like I remember 10 years ago, I would see them all over the place. Now all of a sudden, you rarely ever see one. I think the whole cash for clunkers or whatever that thing was of taking salvage cars and crushing them, I think that took a lot of PT Cruisers to their final resting place.
I think that's right, because that was in the mid to late 2000s, I think that program took place. So I think a lot of those cars did become crusher material. But there's a whole time frame when these things were coming out, like nostalgia plays were big, right? This is after the 2000s. So we already talked about the Prowler and the HHR and SSR. You have the PT Cruiser, but then there are a couple of companies that managed to get this right? There was the new Beetle that came out, and like, okay, we could argue about whether that was successful or not, but like there were people that genuinely liked those cars. There was the Mini Cooper, right, which was sort of a restyled version of that car that always sort of looked retro and like a little baby car. Mm-hmm. So there were ways to do this successfully, right? It's just that Chevy and Chrysler didn't quite figure it out.
The American companies in the 2000s were just producing wild vehicles, and not wild of like cool and groundbreaking and innovating. It was just like bizarre and gross and interestingly designed. Like if we think about early 2000s for American companies, all of those companies were going after this nostalgic play and just whiffing and whiffing and whiffing. But if you think about European cars or Japanese cars from the early 2000s, there's not a weird one that I could really think of that's like, oh yeah, that was gross and bizarre and why did they do that? Like a lot of those cars from Europe and Japan during the early 2000s are iconic because they're good cars.
Right.
The American cars from the early 2000s are iconic because they're bad cars. They're weird cars.
Yeah, well, it was a little bit of the pendulum swinging, right? Like the 70s and 80s was the introduction of a lot of those Asian market cars to the U.S. because of fuel restrictions and economy. And, you know, a lot of the American cars just got it wrong for a while, and that created an opening in the market. That was, they called the malaise era of American cars. And then things started to get better for a little while, but then they got worse, right? So it's this sort of swinging of the pendulum where, yeah, exactly right. Those European and Japanese and Asian market cars were super iconic from that era. You could rattle off a ton of different cars, from Honda, from Nissan, from BMW, from AMG and Benz. All those companies did things really well during those periods. Cars that we'd look back on and say, oh yeah, I kind of would love to have one of those. But there's very few of these cars by the American manufacturers who managed to get it right. They're either parts bin specials where they just cobbled together this hodgepodge of things, or they took a concept vehicle that looked unlike anything else. And they're like, well, we don't have any other ideas, so let's go ahead and put it out as a car and see what happens.
So moving on to more American stuff that's interesting and bizarre. One of my favorites, Pontiac Aztek.
Oh man, I don't know if anybody could call that a favorite, but I know where you're going with this. This car was, by all accounts, fugly, right? It had no redeeming qualities to it. It didn't look good from the front. It didn't look good from the back. It didn't look good from the side. I don't know what angle you could possibly create. There's that rear 3/4 angle they photograph cars on to make almost anything look good. This car still doesn't look good from that angle.
It is pretty bad. From the front end, it has its normal grille, and then there's almost like a secondary smaller grille above it. And then same thing happens with the headlights, where they basically took the headlights, and then there's another set of headlights above it, slightly smaller. It's almost like they designed the car once, and they're like, it's not tall enough. We need to extend it height-wise.
Yeah, and it wasn't bad enough, so that could we put some plastic cladding all around the bottom of the car just to make it look as cheap as it probably is manufactured? Because that's what they did. If I describe what this car looks like, it's somewhere between the family truckster from National Lampoon's Vacation, that hideous station wagon that was just like wrong in every dimension, with a 70s VW Thing. If you remember those, it looked like those things were barely bolted together. They were sort of a drop top.
Yeah.
They had this shape to them that was just wrong, and maybe also cool in that retro kind of way, and they were just different. But there was a reason they called it a Thing, because they couldn't call it anything else. You would just see it and you go like, what is that thing? Well, I don't know why they decided to call this an Aztek. I mean, no disrespect to the people with Aztec heritage. You would want to not associate yourself with this car.
Well, they called it an Aztek because it was supposed to be like this adventure mobile. Like, it was supposed to be this, like, not off-roader in the sense of like a Range Rover, like we think about an off-roader, but it was supposed to be like this vehicle that you could take to a national park and camp. They actually equipped Azteks with a tent. There's a tent attachment that goes to the back hatch, and you could tent out of the back of your Aztek.
You know why they did that? First of all, you just said out the back of your Aztek. And I think you need to think about that a few times. The reason it came with a tent was because they were so unreliable, you might have to sleep on the side of the road. They were just going to equip you appropriately. There's something else I never really thought about this car, and I think is appropriate. Tech was spelled T-E-K, because that was like the retro futuristic way of indicating the future. There was a novel or a book series by none other than William Shatner, Captain Kirk himself from the original Star Trek, that he wrote. So you think of that guy. It was called Tech War. So it was exactly that same kind of idea, that retro futuristic. It was the AZ Tech. Arizona, that's our target market, and it's the futuristic Arizona mobile, Aztek. Prove me wrong.
This is another one of those vehicles for me where it's like, it's so bad that it's kind of good. And I mean, back then, the Aztek was once again like the butt of the joke of, if you drove one, you were a loser. That whole piece of like the PT Cruiser, the PT Loser, the Aztek was the exact same way. Like if you had a Pontiac Aztek, you were lame. But I feel like we're rounding the corner.
Well, the butt of the joke only makes sense if it's coming out your Aztek. Sorry, I had to say that.
But I feel like we're coming around the corner of like, these things are so weird and gross that like, I feel like there's somewhat of an appreciation of just like how absolutely terrible this thing is. Where like, if you have an Aztek nowadays and it's kind of clean, respect to you, Maybe that's just me.
I don't know how much respect there is in that. There's something to be said for the fact that you could hold on to something that was mostly plastic and glue and still have it held together. Maybe you have very unique environmental conditions or humidity, temperature control where you live. A lot like most of these cars during these eras, it wasn't good enough to only come out with one of these. There was always a sister or sibling company that would kind of make a model too. So we can't overlook the Buick Rendezvous, which was sort of like the slightly more rounded, more boring color version of the Aztec with a Buick emblem on it.
I think if there's any styling savings to the Aztec, it might be like it's a little bit squarey. It's kind of got like a hot hatch look to it. The Buick Rendezvous completely eliminates any sort of potentially redeeming quality of the Aztec. So funny enough, Buick Rendezvous, my uncle had one, and so me and my brother, every time he would come to visit and drive his Buick Rendezvous, we would always make fun of him about having a Buick Rendezvous of like, oh, like the Aztec wasn't fancy enough for you, so you had to go for the Buick Rendezvous.
They gave it a French name, too, to give it that Euro elegance and mystique, which they could not achieve whatsoever with the American cars of that era. So let me ask you this question. Your family had a Prowler and a Rendezvous?
Yeah. Yeah. I swear they have better automotive stylings now. And I didn't adopt any of these interest in these weird vehicles. I have some respect and appreciation, but me, myself, I would not own any of them.
Sometimes the fruit falls pretty far from the tree, is what you're saying.
Yeah, thankfully there was a bit of a hill, and I rolled a bit away from
Rolled all the way down.
automotive stylings.
You somehow wound up in the BMW section.
I feel like that's a pretty safe area.
Yeah. Well, what about, did BMW have any cars that look weird? I was thinking from the late 90s, they had that 318 Ti.
See, okay, I will argue that the 318 Ti, so the E36 chassis of what they called the compact.
Yeah.
I think that those are okay.
The front.
The front is an E36, right? The front is the same.
They got that right.
The back half, yeah, I can understand. They're kind of cool.
I think the back half came out of your Aztec.
Well, the back half looks like it fell off. Like it looks like someone's rounded back. It's not a sexy rear end by any means.
It was like chopped, like it was straight from top to bottom.
Right. And the interesting thing is that for the E36 compact, the front half of the vehicle is all E36 running gear. So it's E36 suspension, motor options, stuff like that. The rear half of the vehicle is E30. So it's all E30 suspension in the rear. So they made these cars to make them cheap, a little bit more economical, better fuel economy.
Yeah, they were definitely, I want to say they were like low $20,000 range when they were new, which for a BMW was kind of unheard of.
Right, yeah, and that was like the main point of it. It was supposed to be kind of like a hatchback, a BMW hatchback. So the only redeeming quality of a compact, maybe by your standards, is the front end of it. So that's where, for BMW, the worst looking BMW, well, there's a couple not so great ones, but in my opinion, one of the worsts is the E46 compact.
Ooh.
Now, if you want to talk about a bad looking car front and back, it's the E46 compact. Because the E36 compact, you can make them look pretty good because it still looks like an E36. The E46, for whatever reason, they redesigned the front end and made these weird little pod headlights rather than like just making it look like an E46 on the front without a rear end. They redesigned the front end of the vehicle, and it's absolutely disgusting. It looks like that alien from Lilo and Stitch with like the multiple eyes.
Oh, man.
It's just not a good look.
No, there's something about it that's just wrong, and it's another one that's like wrong from all angles.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
Yeah, how could you ruin an E46? That's like one of the most beautiful designs ever, and somehow they figured it out.
Right, we just talked how like mid-2000s cars, the European cars look pretty good. Like when Chevrolet was producing the SSR, BMW made the E46 M3. Complete polar opposites. The E46 compact, though, that was like, BMW didn't even sell those in the US, but like that was maybe them trying to be like, all right, we got to match the Americans and make a terrible looking car.
Yeah, the 318 Ti was bad enough. We had a friend at work who had one, and the kind of running joke was we called it the Wannabeamer. So like what a 2000s thing.
That's a solid name.
Yeah, I guess now it would be Bimmer, but we didn't know any better.
We've touched on a couple European catastrophes. There's probably a handful of more.
Do you remember the Renault Fuego? Fuego,
No.
like fire. So Renault is known for having a lot of kind of interesting designs over time. And in the 80s, for a brief period, they started importing the Renault into the US. But this was not a good time for Renault. And in particular, their sort of US converted cars. What are the words that come to your mind when you see this Renault Fuego, Sylas?
I don't even know where to start. I'm speechless. It kind of looks like if an Alfa Romeo was made in Russia.
Like the Lotta Romeo?
Pretty much. It's got like a weird black racing stripe down the side of it. It's kind of got a boxy styling like I would give it to like Alfa Romeos from the 80s and the 90s.
Right.
But then everything about it is just like badly proportioned. It looks like it's just like they ran out of money to produce it. And they're like, oh yeah, you want 18-inch wheels? Yeah, we can only do 13s. Everything about it just seems poorly proportioned and just cheap.
And like everything from that period of the 80s, like the mid 80s, it had to have this giant bumper on it, right? So they made sure that they designed the car and then they tacked on this rear bumper that just looked like it hung off the back of the car.
I'm now just seeing a rear view of this vehicle and it just didn't end. They just ran out of metal but continued with glass.
There were these ridges around the back too. So it was like these horizontal ridges that ran all along the back under the hatchback. And I can't imagine if that was a design decision or, again, they ran out of material and it was just cheaper to have like gaps in between.
Yeah, that's not even a racing stripe. From the photos I was seeing, I just saw this like black line going down the side of the vehicle. I'm like, okay, cool. They put like a styling sticker or whatever on it. Yeah, you're right. That's just like slats. It's such a bizarre textured piece.
If you could say it with a straight face, the Renault Fuego setting the world on fire. I think if you drove this car, you would probably get set on fire.
You should set your Renault Fuego on fire.
That was a problem with the Renaults from the mid 80s. Actually, of all these cars, my dad had one. My dad had a Renault Alliance. It was a boxy, pretty nondescript looking car. I wouldn't say anywhere as ugly as the Renault Fuego. But man, this thing was made out of spit and glue. And I remember at one point he had an engine failure where when he brought the car or had it towed back into the dealership, they told him the engine melted. I didn't know that was a possible thing, which then led the question, is the engine made out of plastic?
Sounds like that was a no fuego situation.
No.
I mean, like, I keep looking at these cars. I'm like, dude, they're so bad. I kind of want one. Like, I'm now looking at a Renault Fuego Turbo, and it kind of looks like a European AE86 Trueno.
Oh, yeah, maybe.
And it's just like, I don't know. I feel like I'm one of those people where, like, if it's weird and bizarre and no one loved it, that kind of makes it a little bit cool just to have something that was just so weird. Once again, I wouldn't pay like over $5,000 for one, but just have like this little POS thing that was forgotten about because it was so terrible. Like I don't know, it's kind of funny.
Yeah, there's something about that. I mean, we're talking about cars that people now seek out because they were so unusual. They made so few of them. They sold so few of them. But does that give it somehow an aesthetic that we are overlooking here, right? The uniqueness of it makes it somehow compelling, makes it a standout. That ugly little dog that only has hair on half its body, like somebody wants to adopt that dog, no question. Why? Because it's so ugly and nobody else loved it. So now it's my turn to love it. And is that how you feel about the Fuego?
I feel like there's just like a little bit of charm in just bad things. I feel like car guys talk about Alfa Romeos in that sense, where it's like an Alfa Romeo is not a very reliable vehicle. The styling of them is phenomenal, but something that isn't perfect or great kind of gives you a better story. Another example of a car that I think is not looked upon in the favorable light, but I've always kind of wanted one just because it's like kind of funny and kind of cool looking if you look at it in a second glance, is a Ford Probe.
Wow, Ford Probe. That was like the most appropriately named car ever. It looks like some kind of probe.
The second generation for sure. The first generation Probe looked like it would hurt because it was very boxy, but then the second generation, they started to smoothen out the styling lines.
I don't know what kind of probe wouldn't hurt a little bit. These are the cars that they used. If you ever saw the movie Back to the Future 2, which I'm sure very few people have seen, but this was the base of the futuristic cars that I don't even know when the period was, like 2200s or something like that in the future. The futuristic cars were a bunch of body kit bolted onto a Ford Probe.
See, that's what I like about it. Like, the Ford Probe is like the epitome of like the futuristic design in the 90s that didn't go wrong. Like, I think it's an attractive looking car. And like, if you take a step away of like, all right, this is a Ford 2-door coupe, kind of sporty, and it came with like cool metallic paints, teal and purple and stuff like that. Like, it's a pretty rad looking car. It had pop-ups. Like, it has all of the things that you would want from a 90s vehicle that like makes it a cool 90s vehicle.
Ford would advertise this car and they said, the Ford Probe, performance you won't forget. I think looking at this car, it's pretty forgettable.
That's what I like about it. Like, no one has them anymore. I don't know where any of them have gone. I don't think that many have survived.
I
Whether it
will.
was like mechanical failures, they've like melted to the ground or whatever. But like every once in a while, if you see a probe, you're like, oh my God, it's a Ford probe. Like it's kind of like this like fun, shocking thing of like, hey, that still exists. Like it still runs.
I will agree that the second generation Ford probes look a lot better than the first gen. The first gen had those things that a lot of American cars in the mid '80s had, these vertical door handles. You know what I'm talking about? Where you'd put your hand behind it and pull.
Yep.
And instead of it being horizontal, it was vertical, like portrait. They were not a good design. You know what other car had that? The Chevy Beretta. Do you remember that car?
No.
Oh my God. The Chevy Beretta had the vertical door handles, and it also had the automatic seat belts. Now, you have not lived life. Well, you won't live life very long if you continue to drive around in a car that had the automatic seat belts. What would happen is you'd get in the car, you'd close the door, the seatbelt would ride along this track that was inside the A-pillar along the roof that would move the seatbelt back and put it down across your shoulder. But what would happen inevitably was it was way too tight, or it didn't land in the right place, and it would like cut across your neck with the seatbelt. This is the thing that's supposed to be helping you keep safe in the car.
All right, I just Googled Chevy Beretta. Now, another car adding to my list that I want. Google Chevy Beretta pace car.
Oh, you got to get the GTZ.
Dude, the pace car, it's in teal. It has matching accents on the wheels and a pink decal on the door. This thing is like the epitome of the 90s. It would be so sick. It's got a body kit. It's got a paint match body kit on it.
This was named after the Italian gun manufacturer, right? Beretta, which, if you're too young to remember this or to be aware, there was a TV show in the 70s, like a detective cop show starring Sylvester Stallone, where his name was Beretta. So that's the vibe that they were going for, and they did not get it.
I think this might go down as like top 5 coolest Indy 500 pace cars. For me, at least. It's pretty sick.
I'd call it a swing and a miss. All right, let's talk about some other controversial decisions, okay? I remember seeing this car when I was younger, and I just remember thinking, who came up with this idea? This is the ugliest thing ever. I don't know what they were thinking, why they couldn't decide what to put together with what. But now in sort of retrospect, I'm like, these are kind of cool. It was the Subaru Brat.
Oh, dude, those things are so sick.
I knew you were going to say that. Man, looking at these things, you're kind of like, it can't decide. Is it a road car? Is it a truck? It's looking like it's not really good at either.
It's a JDM compact El Camino. What's not cool about that?
Oh, man. Did you know this, though? I had no idea. BRAT was actually an acronym for Bi-Drive Recreational All-Terrain Transporter. Wouldn't that be like BIDRAT? I don't know. I guess they left the D out. Bi-Drive. And then there was the Dodge Rampage. So much like that time, the American car manufacturers were trying to knock off everything coming out of Asia. So the Subaru Brat, no matter what you think of it, good, bad, or otherwise, there was the derivative, which you know was not as good, called the Dodge Rampage. What are your thoughts on that, Sylas?
Yeah, that one's not as good. I'd take the Subaru.
You're not getting El Camino vibes off of that guy?
The Subaru Brat at least had some like good styling lines to it.
Yeah.
This looks like what happened in the 90s with American cars of just like slapping plastic bumpers on everything.
Right. It was like the tack-on bumpers from the 80s, but taken to the next level.
Moving on to another highlight for me in regards to interesting cars that are iconic, but not for reasons that are favorable to what the car is. Cadillac EXT. We're talking about you want to be a high roller down in the Florida Everglades, you get yourself a Cadillac EXT. Now, what the Cadillac EXT was basically a rebadged Avalanche.
So hold on. You have to tell people what the Avalanche is because they might not know.
So the Avalanche makes me very upset in regards to its impracticality and why it exists as a vehicle. Basically, the front half of it looks like a Chevy Suburban, Chevy Tahoe, but then the back half of it, they lop off the storage compartment and add a bed, which is so small, you can't fit anything in it, and they added a bunch of plastic bodywork to make it look somewhat sportier.
And it was jacked up, so it was kind of hard to reach stuff. So they added a midgate because you couldn't really reach what was in the back of this lopped off car that was too short to carry anything useful. And then they decided, let's make a luxury version of this car. Is that right?
Exactly. Something that's completely impractical. Now we need to add luxury to the situation, because that makes way more sense. We're already so far down the rabbit hole of this thing makes no sense in the marketplace. Let's make it even more expensive. Let's add a bunch of plush leather. Let's add even more, rather than the plastic that the Avalanche got, the black plastic, let's add paint matched bodywork with the Cadillac. And so basically the Cadillac EXT was the pickup truck variant of the Cadillac Escalade. That's the best way you can think about it.
Wow. I mean, look at the headlights on this thing. They're like this giant a rhombus or like a trapezoid. They're really strange looking. There's nothing about this car that was built for either utility or performance. It's sort of neither here nor there. You took all of the utility of an Avalanche, which is to say,
none,
not much, and we made it luxury in only the way that Cadillac can do.
This is a vehicle that really embodies the Jersey Shore mindset.
Yeah, I could see that.
That's a New Jersey vehicle right there.
Yeah, I think that's right. And maybe the pearl white, like a faded pearl white color.
Oh, it's got to be pearl white. You got to get that metallic white that almost looks gold in the sun. That's definitely the color combo you got to go. Or black. If you had a Cadillac EXT that wasn't the pearlescent white or black, you wasted your money on an EXT.
I don't even know what to say about that. I think the gold package came with the gold chains.
I think the gold package was standard when you got an EXT.
Oh, yeah.
So, Cadillac, we're really looking at you to bring back the EXT in the modern day era. I think that's really what we're missing in the Cadillac lineup in the modern day.
Dude, there's some design decisions that I don't know what they were thinking at the time. Like, they would start with a good base concept. And you know, from my dream garage, you know where I'm going with this. Cadillac did this tie-in with Pininfarina to make the Cadillac Alante, which I think was sort of a running joke for a while. Cadillac did this thing where they would just put things together that didn't make sense, and I think the EXT really embodies that well.
Back in the day, if you saw a PT Cruiser or a Pontiac Aztec, you'd be like, oh, my day's ruined. I had to see this god-awful, ugly thing. Like,
yeah, it actually would ruin your day just to see one of these cars.
And I think that the Tesla Cybertruck is the modern-day embodiment of that. So, like, it'll be interesting to see how Cybertrucks moving forward, like say if we jump forward, 25 years, is the Cybertruck going to be one of those things where it's like, yeah, that thing was so gross and disgusting in its time, but now it's kind of like a cool collectible because everyone kind of hated on it.
Yeah, and we all know they'll have all burned up by then. So there'll be a limited edition.
Oh yeah, there's going to be barely any of them that still exist because either they caught fire or ran out of batteries or you couldn't replace it or the unobtainium pieces that took to build it are no longer available. That might be the future collectible. Let the market tank on Tesla Cybertrucks, and then maybe pick yourself up one for like a couple grand.
But be really careful because that thing will cut you from every angle. There was a period in time where lo-fi was a thing, like in music and in graphics too. It was kind of retro cool to be lo-fi and to have like 8-bit graphics and stuff. This is the car version of that, and it did not come together. I mean, just ask yourself.
Well, talking about like, oh, it's going to cut you, back to the 90s second-gen Ford Probe. So actually, there's two separate designs for the pop-up headlights for the Ford Probe. There's the European one, and there's the US model. So if you look at the Ford Probe headlight design, it's actually pretty curved for the front end. So when the headlights pop up, they have this very sharp point on the inside. And for the European market, they actually had to like square them off to make them safer for pedestrians. So if you have an American Ford Probe, second generation Ford Probe, you have a pedestrian skewer.
You have a weapon, is what you're saying.
Pop up the headlights and hit a person you don't like.
Sometimes we'll talk about a car in a good way being a road weapon. This one is in a really bad way. Watch out. It's kind of like people from that era could show you the scars on their shins at exactly the right height where those headlights went.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, interesting thing about the Ford Probe is there was a dangerous headlight design that the European market would not accept.
So there was another boxy car. This is one I actually owned at a point in time. It was the late 80s. It was an 87 was the one I had. Nissan Pulsar NX. So if you don't know this car, there's been multiple generations of the Pulsar. This is the later one. It had these really futuristic rear taillight covers They were like these like diagonal ovals. But the really distinctive thing about this car was it was modular. It had different configurations where you can take off the entire back like hatchback section and you could replace it with this thing called the Sportback. And just to make you think that there would be a rounded angle somewhere in this thing, they took out the C because that was too rounded. So it was the Sport BAK, Sportback. And it was like a boxy shooting brake meets estate wagon looking version of this car, which at the time was one of those things where you're like, I think this is cool, but everybody's beating me up and I'm not sure why, so it must not be. But now, fast forward, 30 plus years on this car, you look back on it and you say, damn, that was a good looking car.
I think that's another one of those examples where back in the day was like, yeah, that's a gross looking car. Like people didn't want the Sportback. And then now that's the collectible piece because no one wanted it. So the Sportbacks are probably super rare nowadays.
Oh, yeah.
So if you have a clean Sportback, people are like, oh, dude, that was the one to have. Like, why wouldn't you get that option? And now they're super collectible. I think it looks sick. Like, the Sportback makes it look way cooler.
Yeah, it has that throwback to, there was a 70s Lotus, I'm forgetting the name of it, that kind of had this kind of look to it. They called them the bread vans, but not in the way of like the
yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah,
Yep.
not in that HHR kind of way. There's also something about when you'd see this car, and of course, being an 80s Nissan, it had T-tops. So you take off the T-tops, and you could take off the back of the car, and you weren't supposed to drive it like this, but it looked kind of like the first generation Toyota MR2, which is another one of those wedge-shaped things that people are not sure if is cool or not, but now there's not a lot of them around, so they're going for crazy money.
Right. No, I think the Sportback is super cool.
Yeah, I kind of do too. I kind of wish I still had that car now. You know, that was my first stick shift car.
It's a pretty good first.
It was all right. I can't complain.
Maybe now we got to find a Sportback.
I think we do. If any of you listening have a Nissan Pulsar with the Sportback, please write to us. No, but the Nissan Pulsar, it was a cool design.
Yeah, it's fascinating how, like, there's cars that didn't really take off in their time, and now all of a sudden we show appreciation for it. It's just like how taste changes through the decades of, yeah, that wasn't cool during that era, but now it is cool. And it's so fascinating that some cars become iconic and they become pop culture icons because they're weird, bizarre, or were hated, or had these weird histories. I think it's so fascinating to look at these vehicles of like, oh yeah, that was the hated car in my generation, and like, but everyone knows it. Everyone talks about it.
You know, I think there's more weird bad than there's weird good. No, you know, I would take that back. I think the weird bad is more memorable for some reason. Like, you think back to those cars that were just not pretty, and maybe they catch your eye now because they're so different looking, but in sort of like the test of time and what's going to become something that's actually desirable, I think the weird good is going to win out, but the weird bad still gets its place.
Right. It's this whole thing of like bad publicity is still publicity, right? When you talk bad about a car, you're still talking about it at the end of the day. And that's why like something like the Pontiac Aztek has stood the test of time. And some people can argue that it's kind of quirky and cool now because it was such a weird car and it was so hated. But on the other hand, like PT Cruisers, I don't think they'll ever round the corner to be cool. I think they'll always be one of those vehicles that's just bizarre and weird, but no one's going to forget about the PT Cruiser.
You know, and this comes from what we might call a golden era of cars. We were talking about those European and Japanese or Asian market cars that came out in the late 90s, early 2000s as being super memorable. Lots of good cars. Like you could swing a bat and hit a good car just by trying from that era. Yet all these things are sort of exceptions. And yeah, we spread the years out a little bit, like to go back a little bit before that and maybe a little more new. But these are things that somehow managed to miss the mark by so much that it makes for an interesting story now, right? Things that people are seeking out because we now live in this culture where just because something's rare or we call it limited edition or somebody famous like once sat in it or painted it or put their handprint on it or something, somehow that has value in a world where anything is commodity and you can go online and get anything. You can go in almost any city in the world and like you kind of see the same things for sale. The things that stand out are the things that are different, that were unique for the time, that for whatever reason were not popular or not good, maybe by objective means. But yet somehow we look back on those and you're like, can you believe they made that thing? I think I kind of want it.
Right. Yeah. In this episode, we really focused on iconic cars within car history because of their weirdness or bizarreness or incorrectness in some ways and how they've established themselves in the history books as being a recognizable and a pop culturally known vehicle. I think to cleanse our palate of the weird bad and the weird crazy, our next discussion needs to be about how cars over the years become iconic for just being good, just being great drivers' cars. And what makes that? What makes a car iconic? What makes a car stand the test of time? And is there a time period that we can really put our finger on of like, from this year to this year, manufacturers, when they were producing fun cars.
Yeah, what's that golden era of when cars really got it right? It was sort of bookended by these periods where like they got it wrong for a while. Then there was this like light shining in that created some highlights. And then maybe that period ended, right? Things are different again. And so let's talk about these cars here are exceptions to that rule, right? During this period that maybe we think that was one of the best periods, these were standouts, and some of them were standouts for good reasons and some of them for bad.
Right, and we're not going to say that like a time period, every car that was produced was phenomenal. I think we're going to more focus on like drivers' cars or like sports cars. And when did the sports car, when did the fun driver's car start to die out? And I'm going to argue it's when BMW started putting turbos on M cars. But we'll find out.
Tune in next time to find out when Sylas thinks cars went the wrong direction. Or at least BMWs.
We'll dive in deeper next time.
I love it. This has been a fun conversation. Thanks, Sylas.
Thanks, Todd. This has been Cold Start. Thanks for listening.
Next time, drag racing. No, not that.